hello everyone. Welcome back to another podcast episode, number 5 of the Holy Youth Ministry podcast, sponsored by Cornerstone Church, where we talk about youth ministry from a holistic perspective. Yes, the biblical understanding of ministry and the theology of ministry, but also we look at youth ministry from a holistic perspective, talking about mental health. We've talked about community. We've talked about culture, and today we have a very special guest, Mrs. Lauren Bundy herself, in the flesh. By the way, first ever podcast, yes?
Yeah. Yes,
Yep.
it is.
Her first time ever being on a podcast, and she is our children's director. You've been working with children for how long?
It's been 14 years.
14 years. Wow. So you know a thing or two.
Maybe.
Maybe
So.
one or two things. You should know this about Lauren, that there is a very special place for her in heaven, and all of us on staff here hope that one day when we grow up that we will be like Lauren. So I really think that you're going to enjoy this episode today.
Thank you.
But so Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. So, like you said, I've been working here on staff as the director of children's ministries for about 14 years. I've had this really unique and wonderful opportunity where when I took the position, it was never before. It was newly created. So I was the very first, and I'm still here. So over the years, it's really developed from working from the ground up of really just building up the ministries and the options that we have for children and families.
There's a book called Canoeing the Mountains that talks about just this kind of exploratory leadership. That's been you. You've been setting the standard since day one.
Yes. Yes. For good or for bad.
Well, judging by how our ministry is doing, I think you're doing an above average job.
Oh, thank you. We also have 4 kids of our own. Our oldest is just about 15 and our youngest is 8. So we are involved in foster care and adoption. Our youngest is adopted. So we definitely have navigated a lot of areas of parenting and ministry that have just given us a perspective that maybe some other people don't have.
Yeah. And done it with incredible grace, too. I'm sure there's been hiccups along the way, though.
Oh, yeah, daily. I think I just have the attitude that I fail my children just about every day. So if you just come in really humble, dependent on God for every breath.
I heard it said once that no matter how good of a parent you are, they're still going to sit on a couch one day across from a professional talking about how we messed up their lives.
How we did it all wrong.
Oh,
Yes.
gosh.
Yeah.
My parents were so perfect that now I don't know what to do with my... I don't know. I mean, that's... I imagine, like... that again, you and Mike are so incredible to those kids, and such a gift and a blessing. So
they're very, very much gifts to us. So.
But you've talked a little bit about, you have Gabe who's 15, then you have Kai who's 8. But you have successfully transitioned one teenager from pre-adolescence to now, or preteen to teenager. And can you talk a little bit about what that was like, navigating that shift in adolescence?
Yeah, so define successfully.
He's still alive?
He's still alive.
He's breathing.
Yes, he's alive and breathing. Functional. Yes, I think it's a huge shift in parenting when our kids start into those preteen years and certainly into the teen years. It's a really big shift. Our role needs to morph, right? And I think what's really hard is we want to hold on, speaking for myself even, you want to hold on to the level of control that you had when they were young. And you just don't have that anymore, regardless of what you want as a parent and regardless of all the protections and conversations that you put into place and that you have with them. It's a natural part of them learning day by day to become older and more independent in what life is like as an adult, right? I think we sometimes forget that being a kid is hard. So being an adult is hard. We have bills and mortgages and electricity and jobs and we have to make meals and groceries. Like being an adult is super hard and stressful. Nobody's going to argue that. But I think sometimes as parents, we forget that being a teenager is very hard.
Yep.
And being a child is very hard.
Oh, yeah.
And each phase of life is really hard. And part of what's hard for us as parents as they transition to become teenagers is letting go of the same level of control we had when they were young, and equipping our teens for making good decisions on their own.
Teenagers and good decisions. I just feel like I hear that sentence so often.
Yeah. Yeah, because more often than not, and we forget about what it was like for ourselves
Oh
too,
yeah,
and
so
that
easily forget.
how many like terrible decisions I
Oh,
made
so many.
as a teenager.
Do you ever look back and just cringe at the things?
Yeah. Even just like emotionally, like one. So they're in this phase where they're starting to tackle these really big things, but don't have the communication skills or the emotional
Particularly
bandwidth
the guys. Good.
to handle them in the way that we would in our 40s.
Yeah.
So if I could impute anything on a teenager, it would be to have like all those years of experience and wisdom that you have when you're 40 that you don't have when you're 14.
Yeah.
You know, but we can't do that. We
Nope.
have to
Nope, you got to learn it.
help them navigate it. Yeah.
So, we're going to be talking today. We're talking a little bit about adolescence, but also the thing that I really want to talk to you about, especially since you have 14 years of experience, is talking about the emergent generation that we're seeing.
Yeah.
We're talking about Gabe is, I believe, Gen Z. Yes.
Yes.
I believe he's one of the last years of Gen Z.
Yeah. So he's born in 2009. So
2014, I believe, is when
12 to
Gen
14
Alpha that we're going to be talking about today really comes onto the scene. But so what, again, as we kind of step into that, so let me look at my question here. What understanding of adolescence did you have walking into Gabe's teenage years?
Sure.
Right. So when you looked at his kind of, again, because you're very holistic as well in your understanding, and, how did your understanding of adolescence and change as you've talked about, and honestly remembering that being a kid is hard, how did that affect your parenting and your ministry?
Sure. That's a really good question. So Gabe being our oldest, I didn't have other teenagers, right? I feel like we joke with him all the time that his younger siblings, things are some standards and some rules and things are a little bit different than they were for him. And we joke with him all the time that, well, we had to learn. We had to learn that maybe that was a little overkill, you know?
Do you have an example? Just curious.
With movies, particularly with movies. And we joke with him sometimes that, well, the only way I can see a movie is if I lower the standard of what I let the younger kids watch.
Yeah,
otherwise,
that's fair. Yep.
Right. So we joke about that. But as far as my experience, so I was an education major in college. My undergraduate's in music education. So any education major has to study just basics, developmental psychology. So, I mean, I had coming into parenting just a couple of those classes, right?
I would have killed, by the way. That was the one class I didn't take at Gordon that I really wish I had, was psychology.
Yeah. I think it's helpful for any human, not just an educator.
Sure.
But a lot of it was just like textbook and teaching children, and regardless of teenagers or preschoolers, is very different than parenting. I can have, if I tell this story all the time of how I had a chorus of like 120 fourth graders, right, eating out of the palm of my hand, but yet I can't get one of my own children to follow instructions.
Did you say you led a chorus of 120? Yeah,
I did.
Get it, girl.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But so I think sometimes we come into parenting thinking it's going to be just like that, just like teaching, and it's not. It's not. So, so you were asking me.
Yeah, I was asking
experience about coming in. Sorry, with Gabe. So, everything is new as a parent versus helping lead other people's children. It's very different. It is, because they're not going to respond to you the same way that your own
other people's children will be like,
does.
Yes, Mrs. Bundy, and your own kids will be like, whatever, Mom.
Yeah, right. And I think we have to remember that they don't wake up in the morning with the goal of tearing down our self-esteem and destroying our lives. It's not the goal. We take a lot personally as
I'm sure there's somebody listening to that be like, are you sure about that?
I know. It's very true. It's hard. We have to remind ourselves of that. Yep.
And so you've mentioned too, it is so easy for us as parents to forget, right? And I liked what you had to say too about, everything's new, we're experiencing everything at the same time, but so are our kids.
Right.
And I have my daughter's 5 years old and she's learning and growing, and I so often forget that she's five.
Yes.
She's five.
Yes.
And when she's
Yes.
throwing tantrums over things, I have to remind myself that I've got a couple more years experience of dealing with the things that she's dealt with,
Right.
and that I need to be a whole lot more patient.
Mm-hmm.
But what else, in addition to oftentimes just needing to slow down and remember that it's hard? What
Yeah.
are some other mistakes that parents and even churches make during this transition period from um, kind of child to teenager?
Sure. I think that as far as the church goes, some of the mistakes that we can easily make is feeling like we need to separate them out, right? So there certainly is the model of having separate services for teens, or never having the kids, the young ones, as a part of the service at all. Like they just kind of check into their own little world when they
Hmm.
arrive in the building. But I think biblically speaking and historically speaking, what is the healthiest is for us to be doing life together
Mm.
and worshiping together. And that doesn't negate the fact that we definitely need children's ministry options and
Lauren
we
out here
need
trying to
youth
talk herself out of a
ministry,
job.
right? No, we're not. Like, but I think making them known and a part of
Yeah.
the daily
Yeah.
community, right? They are not just the future of the church body. They are the church now. I think that's
Hmm.
a really big mistake that we make for children and teens.
Yeah.
Because I think that causes us to stumble and to not equip them for living their life of faith now
Hmm.
in their peer community, in their homes, in their schools, or, wherever, regardless of what your schooling method is, homeschooling, public school, private school, like they just need to be equipped for living that now and being God's people
And I
now.
wonder again from a psychological perspective that if you now, mind you, again, I'm sure there are great churches out there that separate, and that's fine. We
Absolutely.
do that a little. We have kids stay for worship and announcements, and then we have them up through third grade. Up through
Yes.
third grade, go down
Have the
to
option for
children's
children's
church and have the
church.
children. But we leave
Hmm.
our fourth, our starting in fourth grade, our fourth graders are getting, again, highly theologically rich sermons, which is really encouraging. And I love that about our church.
Hmm.
But do you think psychologically, if you separate that out and have separate teen services and all that, that you're telling students you're not ready for being the church now?
Yeah. And you're not ready for the
Yeah.
real deal. And I think it also creates a culture of being catered to
Hmm.
so now, okay, so they graduate high school and now all of a sudden they're with the real grown-ups, right? So
Yeah.
what have we prepared them for,
Hmm.
right? And now nobody is catering to them anymore. So why should they even be a part of this?
Yeah. It's hard enough for
I
a
think it
college student to get
can,
out of
can
bed in the
I'm
morning, let
certainly no
alone go to
expert
church.
in that area, but it certainly can contribute to them just leaving
Yeah.
altogether
I
because
can.
they can go and be catered to elsewhere.
Mm, that's a
Yeah.
really, really good point, Lauren. So what about
Thanks.
parents? What do you think in this? You said too, is it trying to hold on? Maybe one of the mistakes parents make in this season is trying to hold on too tightly and not letting them have a little bit of that independence. Could that have an adverse effect? Because you were talking about.
Certainly. Absolutely. And I think for every family that's going to wax and wane, and for every teen that's different
Hmm.
because it's kind of knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your own child, right? So, um, technology can certainly help assist us, right? With
put
with
put air
that.
tags on our kids.
Right. Or just being really smart about utilizing the technology that they're already immersed in ways that are healthy and helpful
Hmm.
for developing a level of trust between teen and parent.
So would you, again, speaking about technology, again, would you, in your family, do you treat technology more as a privilege rather than a right?
Yes. And I think there's certain when a level of trust has been broken, we might
Sure.
really kind of pull back on some things. But absolutely right. Yeah, we can't have, certainly there is no free roaming of
Well,
internet or usage whenever we want, with whatever we want.
it might be. Again, I remember in researching for our conversation together, so Gen Alpha, that we're going to be talking about a lot, they are
Yes.
the first truly digital native generation.
Yes.
And being raised by millennials who are largely well versed in in technology. But the interesting thing I noted is 40. This might sound shocking. 42% of 6 to 11-year-olds have a social media account.
Yes.
42% of 6 to 11-year-olds, which, by the way, the age like beginning is supposed to be 12 and up, which I still think is too low.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think that we need to have better regulations. I'm not saying social media is bad,
Yeah.
but I will say social media
I would.
for 6 to 11-year-olds is terrible.
Yes, I would agree. And I think there's this whole like stigma that everybody else is doing it, so I have to let my parents do that. And my children have access to this. And I think if I can tell parents anything, please stop. Like that's not true. It's just not true. I think you just be comfortable saying that's just not the way we do it here. We don't do that here. We don't do that here. It's not healthy. Here's why, in a nutshell, just a couple sentences, and that's it. And you be prepared for them to come back over and over again for wanting a cell phone too young and wanting social access to social media. We have a happy medium. I think that we found our younger ones do have iPads, and they don't have free reign to text or call whomever they want, but they do have designated times where they are able to call their friends or FaceTime their friends
Sure.
and those sorts of things. But no, they don't have social media.
Yeah. Again,
No,
parents, please hold off on social media as long as you
yeah.
can.
Yeah, it's just getting comfortable with being countercultural. So if we're gonna define maybe some characteristics of this generation,
Yeah.
Alpha, I think we have to get comfortable so the book of Judges says, kind of opens up with everybody doing what was right in their own eyes, right? And this is a total period of complete disaster and
And
destruction
depravity.
and depravity and violence
Yes.
for the nation of Israel, right? Because everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And it talks about how this generation had just forgotten what God had done and who he was. So if we apply that to our lives now, our culture now, and particularly these kids coming up, we're not just a post-Christian culture. This is a post-Christian culture.
Post-truth, even.
Yes,
Word of the year,
because
2016
that
was
concept
post-truth.
of doing what was right in their own eyes, really what that is your own personal truth, right? If we
Yeah,
apply that to
you're
now.
living your truth.
Yes, living your own truth. And I think we can kind of point to that ideal that we've kind of accepted as a culture, and we can see some of the disastrous elements of that, right? So if we're living lives that are counter-cultural, that really is like standing firm and know there is universal truth, and that is found solely in Jesus, right? That we just have to be really ready to just do that without that being popular at all and really foreign. So I think when it comes to ministering to this generation, it really comes down to assume nothing. They really don't know the basics of our pillars of faith. They don't know that. They don't know. I even have to teach, when we use the phrase that Jesus saves us, we have to be really specific about what Jesus is saving us from. Jesus is not saving us, from this, especially because they don't think abstractly when they're really young. Everything's very concrete. So I have lots of conversations about when I'll even ask open-ended questions. What is Jesus saving you from? Oh, the bad guys from breaking into my house, or things like very concrete like that. The idea of being a sinner even being the need to be saved from ourselves and our
Mm-hmm.
own sin nature is very foreign.
Why is there a psychological reason for that, or is it because of being told you're great just as you are, all of that? Also, it's just our own natural pride. I'm just curious.
I think we could talk a lot about that and really analyze
Is
that.
that a nature nurture thing?
But I think, well,
Or
if they're coming from a basis of not only are their parents unchurched, but their grandparents are in church,
mm,
like there isn't any generational, there's no like, oh, well, we go to church because especially where we live,
yeah,
because grandma
yeah,
tells us we need to do, well,
sure,
grandma probably didn't go to church.
yeah,
So there isn't like this foundation of the basics of God is holy. We have fallen from grace. We have this sin nature that we're born with. And in order to be made into a right relationship with God, we need to be saved from our own sin nature.
hmm,
Jesus is the solution for that,
yeah,
right? That there isn't a general understanding of that. So it's assume nothing. And I think just when we feel like we're saying it too much, it's just starting to sink in.
yeah. Yeah, we talk about again. My daughter's 5, and people might disagree with this, but I talk about sin with her all the time and how we're separated from
Right.
God. And I think we don't give kids enough credit for the things that they can understand now.
I absolutely agree. Talk about that with parents a lot, that they can actually handle a lot more than you think they can. And they're thinking on a deeper level than you assume they are.
Hmm.
Because God created us to be really intelligent.
And he also said,
So,
"Have faith like children." So
yes, yes. So I think they're really void of basic theological truths
yeah,
as a generation. So we just have to come into ministering to them with that in mind,
yeah.
that we get.
And so even in this emergent Gen Alpha, I mean, I don't. I mean, again, because it's so unchurched. When we're again speaking of youth ministry, I think that we can't assume any faith background. And so
Mhm.
when we in youth ministry are using conversations like we're talking about like the cross, talking about salvation and sin, right? These are words that in the past people would just have a general understanding of. But even when
Right.
I was in our young adult ministry, I remember having one night talking about the cross. One of our young adults stops us. She's 22.
Mm-hmm.
She goes, "What do you mean by that?"
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And I think, yes, absolutely. That makes sense to me because I think we often assume a lot because we are in a faith community all the time. We assume that people have picked up on this, but no, because we have to remember that everything else they're being told from every other source of information, media is not teaching them this.
Yeah. You're,
And that can be tricky to navigate because you're also ministering. So if you're ministering to a group at large, you're also ministering to people that really might have really solid theology and faith.
yeah.
So I think circling back constantly to the basics is really important.
Yeah, and it's fun. Sometimes it's interesting too. I've been accused, especially in light of I know this, and so I share a lot of the basics. And some again, we
Yeah.
come from a very theologically rich church,
Yeah.
and kids will be like, "Josh, you say that all the time," and I'm like,
Hmm.
"Yeah, well, you need to hear it all the
Yeah.
time."
We need to be reminded of this.
But I want to talk a little bit about I wrote on here upheaval that Gen Alpha has been through. I mean, we
Sure.
again feels like forever ago that
Pandemic.
we had the pandemic, right?
Hmm.
Crazy. And it was really, really difficult for teenagers. And I've talked about
Yeah.
the psychology and the effect that it's had on teenage brains, even adult brains, right? But I've never had a conversation with someone like you talk about, hey, what was it like for Gen Alpha to walk through schools being shut down and masking and all the fear that came about as a result of that? So, what effect have you noticed in particular as a result of the pandemic on Gen Alpha?
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, I would say definitely stunted in emotional and academic progress. Um, where I think there's a huge rift is really with the ability to connect with our peers.
Hmm.
And I think some of that has to do with the level of structure our culture imputes on families. So with sports, for example, or pick an activity. There's no more, let's join baseball, have a practice and a game every week. It's 4, 5 days a week. It's everything has to be structured
This morning,
to the T.
this morning I read from a pastor who's
Hmm.
saying his kids had practice 6 nights a week. They're
Yeah.
10.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we just chose to not continue.
Yeah.
Because once you get past that like U8 phase and you're in that like U10, that like 10, once you're 10, it's like you're a professional baseball player.
Yeah. And
And it's not healthy for, I would really advocate that. There are some children that might thrive on that, sure, but not for our family. We're not living and dying by that schedule, because then they don't know how to just play. So that's
hmm,
something that we see a lot, and just interacting with other families is it's really hard for kids to just play without an adult micromanaging you.
huh,
There's a lot of disconnect in being able to resolve conflict on their own,
interesting.
right? If you think you seclude in those developmental years, you really just pull kids into isolation. So in these formative years, when they would have been learning to figure it out on the playground
Hmm.
and learning how to communicate in ways that are appropriate, it's just they were devoid of that for some time, and I think we're playing catch up a little bit. Is what we're
Is there
seeing.
any truth, by the way, to rumors that I hear that schools are thinking about getting rid of recess?
Not that I've heard. I think that really is counter to all developmental
It
studies.
is. I was gonna
I
say, like,
don't.
recess was the time when you could kind of
That is
take
new to me.
everything you learned in a classroom and apply it.
Yeah. Right. Right. That would be new to me. That's
Yeah.
not
Okay.
something I've
I
heard
just, I
yet.
just, again,
I'll have to look that
I
up.
can't trust everything I read on the internet. And to your, Jamie and I talked a little bit about on our last podcast. We talked about sports, but I mean, even
Yeah.
so our young adult gathering is on Thursday nights from 6 to 8:30,
Yeah.
right? And then oftentimes I'll stay after for a little while, talk with them. Just this last Thursday, I'm driving home at 9:30 at night, and there are 100 teenagers on the
On the field.
Northbridge field
Yeah.
at 9:30 at night
Yeah.
on a school night.
Right.
And we
Right.
want to talk about, again, Jamie and I talked a little about this, the exhaustion of the American teenager.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. No, I think
And
it's a
but when you're
really
taking that
valid.
to U8s and U10s, I
Yeah.
mean, can you imagine how
Yeah,
challenging
so
it?
I think it's a big challenge for parents. So we've said we're just not living this way, right? We have activities certainly that we do. I think you just have to work a little harder to figure out how to get your kids engaged in active,
Yeah.
right? And there are alternatives like for us, it's been parkour, ninja classes, things like that, where you can kind of pick and choose your schedule a little bit
Yeah.
more versus you need to be out on the field until 9:30 every night, because they need downtime, they need sleep, they need time to just be in the comfort of their
How much
home.
sleep? So I was talking the other day that teenagers right now,
Hmm.
uh, Gen Z needs at least 9 hours of sleep a night. What about
Yes,
Gen Alpha? What about an 8-year-old? How much sleep does an 8-year-old need?
they should be getting like 10 hours of sleep a night. So let's say you're getting like 8 hours for a few days, and then you're taking going to bed super late, and then you got to get up early for school. Like it adds up. The lack of sleep
Hmm.
adds up, and it really affects your brain function and your mood, and
Yeah.
really has negative effects on your body. So certainly, are there nights where they're going to go to bed late and not get the full night that they need? Absolutely. But when you're doing that night after night, week after week, it's just really not healthy for them.
Yeah.
It's not. And so that's part of what I think is a challenge for parents, is just coming up with how are we going to tailor our family schedule to be something that's healthy, where we still can have meals together, even if we can't pull it together every night. um, Sitting down as a family and eating meal together is important.
Yeah.
taking
This
that
is
away
it's
every night is not going to
well, again,
deliver
there's
good
so
things.
many. We live in this hurried culture where, I mean, yeah, family dinner is like a thing of the past. What do you mean we sit down together and eat? And mind you, my schedule, I'm not quite at the point. Again, I have a 5-year-old and a 1-month old, so my
Yeah.
schedule's not quite at the point where
Now, we're not sitting down at the table singing
because
Kumbaya.
I'm sitting down at the table singing Kumbaya every night, but also I feel like I don't really have we are not in a stage where our daughter's going to be able to go out yet, but I'm sure that day is coming where we will have to start to set up those boundaries and gasp, say no,
Hmm.
but explain the why behind it. But kind of in light of that, so you've kind of alluded to it. How should parents parent in light of the stunted emotional and academic development brought on largely by fear and closure and isolation?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's tricky. I think we we need to find the balance of teaching them how to engage in real relationships and communication, like real communication skill. And that's very, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of patience, right? They don't learn that overnight, but we as adults, I think, often aren't very good at it either,
No,
right?
goodness no.
Um, Learning to connect in ways that are meaningful, I think, is just a challenge in general
Hmm.
for kids and teens, even for adults, especially living in a culture that really mostly texts information, right? You
Do
can
you ever do you ever call your kids and they text you back what?
That happens. That happens. I think learning how to text well is part of it for teens, right? Um, or even just if I call, pick up, even if it's a short little conversation, we just need to clarify because not everything comes through clearly via
Yep.
text,
Yep.
right? A lot of tone can be insinuated negatively or
Oh,
positively.
there was a video going around virally the other day where a person was like, if you put periods in text messages,
Oh,
it means you're angry at me.
yes. Yeah.
So you have to
No, I
write
get that a
LOL or
lot.
haha.
Mom, why are you texting so much? I'm not going to read all that.
Yeah.
Because the shorthand just isn't natural for me.
Ugh. Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think parents need to just be
Yeah.
really intentional about teaching their kids how to interact in ways that are helpful, but also how to respond. So let's say we're doing that, right? But there's all these kids out there that don't know how to respond well to conflict or to a misunderstanding or we are our a big motto in our house right now is learning how to overlook an offense,
Hmm.
right? So we need to be able to understand what we just kind of let go of and overlook and what we then
Yeah.
address.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Picking and choosing the offenses that you want to look and overlook. That's a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mind you, my 5-year-old does not overlook any of my offenses.
Yes. No. But
She,
I'm sure you do overlook a lot of her
I
offenses.
no, I every now and then. She did. Did I tell you? Have I told you how she woke me up the other day? Like just by choosing violence. She told me, I kid
No.
you not, my 5-year-old woke me up 7 a.m. in the morning.
Yep.
Daddy, you did not leave mom enough chicken
Oh,
tenders in the
you did
freezer.
tell me this. Yes.
You need to
You
do a
had like
better
one
job of
left.
communicating so that mom can eat dinner. And I was like, it's child, like not like a hi daddy, good
Uh,
morning. Nope.
yes.
7 a.m. My
Yeah.
daughter's choosing violence. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there are
Let's learn
no
when to communicate that.
there are no offenses overlooked on her
Yeah.
side. Which
No.
is fine. Which is fine.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
so right, but what should churches then be doing when it comes to ministering to this emerging generation? And we're talking about youth ministry again. Youth ministries, you're gonna soon have these students, and so it's good for us as youth pastors. Also, youth ministry is not just in the church, by the way, and I think that's why we call it the Holy Youth Ministry Podcast.
Yeah.
Is
Right.
it's parents are the most important youth pastors in their kids' lives.
Absolutely.
Again, I just get to come alongside of what the real work that parents are
Yes.
doing.
Yes.
But it is important too for the church as a whole. And youth ministry isn't just teenagers, it's kids too. What should our churches be aware of when it comes to ministering to this emerging generation?
Yeah, I think it's really raising up people who aren't just disciples, but resilient
Hmm.
disciples, right? And being comfortable with being countercultural. So we can apply that to, sports. We could apply that to our sexuality or our views on universal truth. Like
Hmm.
we're gonna be bucking against every area of
Yeah.
life, really. So it's just being comfortable being there and having our identity truly rooted in Christ,
Hmm.
not in what anyone else thinks of us, and just being comfortable with being the only one. I
But
think
that's
is a
hard,
really yes, it's very hard. That's very hard.
especially when these kids are desperate for connection, but maybe their beliefs in Christ then isolate. So how do you manage this desire to belong to a group of people, but also manage the fact that my beliefs and that which I hold to be true might even isolate me from people and might cause people to say, no, I don't want anything to do with you. That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And inviting them into your space and into your world. So, parents, I think it's really important that parents understand that our culture is very messy.
Yeah.
So, ministering to lost and broken people is very messy,
Mm-hmm.
and their lives are going to be messy. So,
Yeah.
I think you have to be intentional about making a space
Yeah.
for your child's friends
Oh, yeah.
and peers,
Yep.
and that oftentimes their lives are not gonna look like me, all cleaned and polished,
Yeah.
right? Because don't we all desire for it to be easy and have
Oh,
everything be cleaned and,
sure.
and polished? But
Oh, yeah.
it's making a space at your dinner table to have them just like show up and sit down and eat with
Hmm.
you, and come to your house to play
Yeah.
video games after school, and making yourself available to just connect with them and have conversations and just be present.
And so I like what you're saying is churches need to be setting the standard of belonging. Belonging is not
Belonging.
unified in not necessarily unified in lockstep of what we believe in worldview.
Right. But that
Belonging
you
is,
belong in the
hey,
world.
yeah, right?
You exist on purpose.
Yes. So
Yes.
you
Yes.
belong here and you're welcome here,
Yeah.
regardless of what you believe.
Yes. Regardless of whether I agree with you or
Which
you
that
agree
is
with me.
that itself
Hmm.
is a countercultural thought.
Yes, it is.
Because
Yeah.
these kids are going to grow up, you don't believe what I believe, I want nothing to do with you. Churches can say, we hold to this truth that might differ from yours, you're still welcome here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that might be a place that's new for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, growing up in the political landscape that we live in, everyone just seems to get along. Everybody's bipartisan.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're really setting a great model for our kids
Right.
to a degree to disagree. So,
Right. 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 Yeah. No, that's really hard and it's really tricky, and I think it comes with a lot of self-reflection and prayer, and communication with God of,
yeah.
you
Oh,
know, what
constantly.
yes, about the role of never compromising truth,
Mm-hmm.
but just loving people where they are
Yeah.
so that they have the opportunity to see the truth is very important.
And maintaining humility in that
Hmm.
I'm holding what I believe to be true, but that doesn't make me better than you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because oftentimes I think, again, like we as Christians, I heard it said to me once that everyone out there is out there shooting their truth guns at each other,
Yeah.
and this is what I believe to be true. This is what I believe to
Yeah.
be true. And someone once said that Christians need to be really careful because ours are the only ones that are loaded.
Mm. Yeah. No, I agree.
So, everyone else is shooting blanks, but we have to be careful when we share that truth and how we share it because, again, Jesus is the way, the
Yeah.
truth,
Yeah.
the life.
And earning that hearing of
Yeah.
just
Oh, yeah. Earn
being
that right to be heard.
be present and
Mm-hmm.
meet the needs, the physical and emotional needs,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a relationship
Mm-hmm.
with people where you can then really start to lay in
Mm-hmm.
on those spiritual things, because this is a spiritual generation. This isn't
Oh, yeah.
These aren't people we're searching for purpose and meaning. God
Mm-hmm.
has written truths
Well,
on the hearts of
oh
men,
yeah.
right? So they are looking, and I think longing for belonging.
Oh yeah.
So we can give them
And well,
that.
and I think to a
Right.
degree, this whole "you do you" mentality and live your truth, it's we're starting to see the negative effects of that. And so
Mm,
kids are slowly, because kids are a lot smarter than we think, right? They're
definitely.
wising up to the fact that wait, this isn't working. Just
Right.
wanting to constantly do things that make me happy and serve my needs. Why do I still feel empty? There's got to be something
Right.
more than this, and that's where we, as the church, can say, "Hey, let me show you what you've been looking for."
Yeah, because only Jesus can fill
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah.
And so you mentioned too about serving the needs of these kids, and because I had something else I wanted to talk to you about that's really interesting about this emergent Gen Alpha,
Hmm.
is that this is the first generation that is going to be growing up with largely non-traditional households.
Sure. Lots of like single parents and
Yes,
the stress that that puts on the
yes.
family. Hmm.
I don't know if it's the majority, but if it's a slight majority, but it's close, where you're seeing a lot of kids grow up without both parents on
Yeah.
a regular basis. And can you speak to a little bit about that and what you've experienced and what we as the church can be doing in the midst of that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think if you think of it logically, there's so much stress that goes on a single parent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you have to be all the things all the time.
Yeah.
And you could be the absolute best parent out there, but because there's only one of you and everything falls on you, there's just only so much time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it does put a lot of strain on families, absolutely. So I think when we live in community with each other, that automatically lightens the load. But that as a parent, that means now we have to be known.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
We have to put ourselves out there.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's
Be vulnerable.
hard. That's hard. I think when we're living life together in community, it certainly can help to support single parents or untraditional parenting, where we have maybe like mixed families, like where we're
Mm-hmm.
remarried, we have
Yep.
stepmoms, stepdads,
Mm-hmm.
step siblings, and really, I would say, I don't know, just I'm certainly no expert, and I'd have to look up statistics, but I would say that that was is more and more common than having this just mom and dad married
Yep.
forever, and
Yep.
just having that stability. I would think that that's certainly less and less common.
Well, because you've talked about too about belonging, and now all of a sudden, kids need to belong in two different spaces, right?
Yeah.
They don't have that
That
continuity. They don't
might
have that
have two different
constancy.
standards of rules and
Yes.
procedures and
Mm-hmm.
routines.
And
Hmm.
that's, I mean, again, like as an adult, I joke, right? Like when my daughter's been born, I'm like, I miss my routines, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm 33 years old.
It throws us off.
I can't even begin to imagine the effect that that's
Yeah.
having on 8-year-olds
Hmm.
and 10-year-olds and even, teenagers.
Right.
So what can we as the church do to provide for families for teenagers?
That's a good question to explore. I think, because the constant is our savior, right? That never changes. But the application of that would change depending on who's in authority,
Yeah.
right? And who's in charge. So I think always coming back to that is going to be really important.
Yeah.
And that's why, really coming down to the gospel and living that out in our
Hmm.
life every day, that's really the only constant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that we're completely reliant on Jesus dying in our place, living that perfect life and
Hmm.
being the perfect sacrifice for us and imputing that righteousness
Yeah.
on us, right? That we don't earn any of that. Um, we've got to continually come back to that all the
And
time.
the security that comes from that, as well as the humility
Right.
of knowing that I am a filthy, wretched sinner,
Yeah. Yeah.
undeserving of any of this, and yet Jesus died for me
Right.
anyway.
Yeah.
That can, I mean, again, like that goes a long way in terms of eliminating any better than thou, holier than thou, And also, but too, especially for parents of, I'm just as broken and messy as the kid in front of me. And so I
Oh,
need to
sure.
impute the same amount of grace that I've received from Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we've talked a little bit about it. Switching gears to technology.
Sure.
Gen Alpha aren't just digital natives; they were raised by digital natives. What role, if any, should technology play in our discipleship and outreach to Gen Alpha?
Sure. Well, I think one, you can't ignore
are
it. um, and I
by the
think
way, are your Kai is 8, Aurelia is
also eight,
also
almost
8,
9.
Zeke
Yep,
is
10.
are they given laptops from school?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So they use Chromebooks at school. We
Yep.
have Chromebooks at home.
Yep.
And I will absolutely say that I think there's certainly a lot of benefits. We even see just in different learning disabilities, just making curriculum accessible to all people. I think we utilize a lot of technology helps in our own home.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak ill of that as a whole. I think that's very helpful. But if you want to, this is the language they speak.
Hmm.
So I think it has to be incorporated in some ways. Does it have to run the show? No, absolutely not. Because I also think that is detrimental to
Yeah.
their learning. I mean, so many studies show I am a physical copy of a book person. I will
Oh
die
yeah.
on that hill.
Oh yeah, me too.
I need the smell and the texture of the paper. I need the visualization of where the words are on the page.
Yeah.
And there are certainly lots of studies that show that that is a better way of what physical books. A lot of times we, by taking that away completely, we're not helping anything.
Well, they read digitally in the form of an E.
Yes.
If a book, they're more apt to actually read, but if it's
Yeah.
digital, they'll read, skip a couple lines, read, skip a couple lines, read,
Yeah. Right.
which is
Right.
just interesting to me.
Right. So I'm certainly not an advocate for doing everything with high tech. You know, what you need is the gospel.
Yes.
That's what you need. God's word. That's all we need, really.
Yeah.
But if we're going to connect with them, we certainly have to incorporate technologies that they are used to using, whether that be using the aid of videos. I mean, we're not pulling out Chromebooks in children's church and
Yeah.
logging on to that's not what we're not doing that. But we do use videos, and we don't use them every week, but we do use them. We have them available through our curriculum. The same with our Wednesday night material. There's the option to use it or to not. And I think we're best served when we're doing a good, healthy mixture of both.
Yeah.
Sometimes not using them and sometimes using them. I think with all areas of life, healthy balance, right, is what we need. But I do think we need to be savvy. We need to be able to speak their language.
Yep.
Otherwise, we're outdated and we don't know what we're talking about, right? In their eyes. Right, that's what they're going to see.
Jamie and I are going to have a conversation on internet monitoring and filtration.
Yep.
Again, I know your family uses Bark. We talked.
We do.
Yeah, Bark is fantastic. If your kids have access to electric devices, there should be some form of monitoring in place. That should be an absolute non-negotiable.
Yep. And then you can control as a parent
because technology is a privilege, not a right.
Yeah.
And I think
agree.
establishing that as well.
Right.
But yeah, I've noticed it too. Like I've been incorporating, even in youth ministry, I've been incorporating screen games that use their phones, and we have this cool thing where they can scan a code and they can, put in. I've done polls, I've done questions where kids are able to answer anonymously. I've done where they can send in answers anonymously, and that there's using technology, and especially to a degree letting them hide behind some anonymity to answer questions has been really helpful.
Yeah, because you can be relevant without compromising truth.
Yes.
Right? You can still be tackling deep theological ideas and be relevant in their lives in the way that they are used to communicating and the things that they connect with. I think that's important.
So can you talk, this isn't in our questions, but I thought of it. Can you talk to the parents right now
Oh, no.
who is feeling peer pressured
Mm-hmm.
into giving their kids devices, into giving their kids social media, this emergent generation, can you talk to them and give them some encouragement to stand strong?
Yes. Because if you love your child, you will tell them no. There are times where we will just tell them no, and that is love. And we can explain why. We can explain that they're, you can go and you can bring up, you can just Google studies of why is this not healthy to give my child free roaming access to social media and what it does to their self-esteem. And, you can have those facts. But when push comes to shove, love does say, no, this isn't good for you sometimes. And, as they get older, sure, they can have a little bit more access to things. But even right now, with our 10-year-old, he wants a cell phone because everybody else wants a cell phone. But we
How many kids in Zeke's class have cell phones?
probably close to all of them.
Oh my days.
Yeah. I
Fifth grade.
mean, my
Fourth grade.
my 8-year-old has friends with a cell phone.
Like smartphones, like iPhones?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have to put restrictions on when this person is allowed to even call because she has the iPad,
Yep.
like I mentioned. But that's why it's not on 24 hours a day with her with the ability to pick up because, other kids would be calling at times that they shouldn't be, in times that my daughter needs to be sleeping or doing her homework or sitting at the dinner table or doing all those things. So you it's okay to say no. In fact, that's healthy and loving. Yeah, Zeke's in fourth grade, and I would say probably the majority
Wow.
of fourth graders. A lot of them, maybe not the majority, I don't know, but a lot of them do. In his mind, everybody has
Sure.
one.
Yeah.
And we target middle school personally as a family as a time when that's more appropriate for them to have that. And with that certainly comes restriction. I think he does have, there's a lot of alternatives for technology that companies have come out with. Zeke does have a watch
Yeah, I've seen
through a
those.
company called Gab.
Yeah.
And it's Gab wireless. His is just a watch because we do allow him to ride his bike through the neighborhood, right? On his own without me. He can go for bike rides. He can go to friends' houses in the neighborhood. And I want him to have the ability to call me if he needs something, like if he's supposed to be back on a certain time. Oh, we're in the middle of a Nerf gun game. Can I have like 15 more minutes type thing? And then I'm not panicked and worried too, right? For him, it's just a watch where he can call us
Yeah.
from the watch. But they also do offer phones that look like smartphones, but don't have access to the internet. Need to have approval of who they're allowed to call, who's allowed to call it,
Cool.
who they can make calls
Oh, that's
to.
cool.
There's so many options out there that are reasonable.
What is that called? That's fascinating. I'd love to link that to this.
We go with the companies called Gab Wireless.
So Gab does do the smartphones that look like, well, the phones that look like smartphones but actually aren't.
Yeah.
Because looks are
So let's
probably
say you
more
have a
important than
fifth
actually
grader.
anything.
They might be old enough to come home on their own after school. You're not going
Yeah.
to be home for 30 minutes or whatever, but you don't have a landline, right? Because nobody has those anymore. Nobody a phone, physical phone on the wall.
Well, I'm trying to remember. Like, I remember when we got caller ID.
Yeah.
And we had a
And that was like,
non-corded phone.
yeah.
And I was like,
Oh my word.
And I didn't
Yes.
have to like, anytime I'd call it like a girlfriend, I'd be like, hi, is so-and-so there? And the dad would be like,
Right. Now they just call each other directly.
They have it so good.
I know they do. They have it so good. But there are options that are reasonable so that your, 10, 11, 12-year-old can come home and be alone by themselves for a little bit in ways that are safe
Yeah.
and have access to communicating with you. And you tracking them to make sure, if you're at work and you want to just make sure they got off the bus and they're at the house and you just log in. Oh, there they are. Yep, they're
Yeah.
good. They're good. I'll be home in 30 minutes, type
Cool.
thing.
I like that.
There are lots of reasonable options. So you can even call your you can call your current cell phone provider, but I think they often push you towards,
Oh, sure they do.
well, we'll just lump in a new iPhone for $10 more a month, and they want to bundle you with those
Oh,
things.
yeah.
So just yeah, do some research
And might need to
and
spend
know what's out there.
extra money for your kid to be safe.
Yeah, I think it's totally worth it.
And I
And
think
ours
that's-
is, we have Gab Wireless. It's a separate bill than from AT&T, our provider that Mike and I, have for our phones. it is separate, but it's very affordable, and I think it's worth the investment.
Well, and that's exactly how you can view it. You can view it as an
Mm-hmm.
investment of,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I understand this emergent generation. I understand technology. I understand belonging. I
Yeah.
understand all of these things within reason and with boundary.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
Reason and
so
boundary. Mm-hmm.
by giving your kid something that, again, honestly, I feel like it's like, oh, if it looks the part, then it's cool enough. Like they just want to be able to basically, like, when all their other friends are on their phone, to take it out and look at it and be like, yeah, I look like you right now, and so I belong, you know?
Yes.
And
Yes.
by giving them something that costs a little bit more but will protect them and their young developing brains,
Mm-hmm.
I think is very much worth the cost.
Yep. I agree.
So a couple more questions here. What would you say is the biggest need for Gen Alpha right now, and how can the church meet that need?
Yeah, I think it comes down to just feeling equipped to face a world that they live in with confidence, knowing that they can live out their faith in a world that might not see things the same way as
Yeah,
them. Yeah, I think they really need that. And I think that we can support them in our community and giving I think parents sometimes forget that we need each other too, to feel like parents need to feel supported.
yeah,
And coming together and not living our lives all in isolation as individual units, but like we are one team
mm,
that is navigating this together. Sometimes we forget that
yeah.
because our lives are so
Yeah, and
individualized.
even we need, again, we've been fortunate in our neighborhood to really be gathering parents together just to talk, which has been really
Right.
cool, which has been awesome. I love that. And I love our church too, in terms of like there's so many parents I mean, one, our church is just growing leaps and bounds. So there's just
Right.
more parents
Yeah.
in every age and stage.
And yeah, and if I could convince parents of this generation of anything, it's stop being afraid.
Yeah.
Stop being afraid that your kid is going to end up a disaster because the world is so broken and you can't do anything to
Yeah.
help them. Like as much as our kids push us away and might pretend that they don't need us, they are longing for us to
Mm,
give them direction. And thankfully, God has already given us that direction and all
yeah.
the answers because we find all of that in Him. So stop being afraid that the world's influence on your child is greater than your influence
Come
on
on.
them.
Oh, say it again, Lauren.
Stop being afraid that God is not in control of the future of your child, right? And your child's day to day. And it's easy when we see, I think it's so easy for us to panic and feel afraid in the bad moments, right? Like when our kids caught doing something wrong or breaking the rules or giving us an attitude or withdrawing or these are all things that happen all the time, right? It's easy to look at just that moment and not zoom out to see the big
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
And I tell myself this and people this all the time that God parents our children better than we
Oh,
do.
yeah.
So we live in such fear, I think, sometimes as parents that the world is just such a disaster and we're swimming upstream. Yeah, we are swimming
We
upstream all
are.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
And God is in control and he's sitting on his throne and he's not afraid of what's happening. This is not shocking to him. There is nothing new under the sun. And his will come to fruition,
Amen.
right? And we have to remind ourselves of that every day as we're parenting these kids, that God is in control. God's plan for his people is good. And that in the end, he wins,
He does.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like you said, if when earlier in the podcast, when everyone's doing everything right in their own eyes, God still won.
Yes,
God still prevailed.
absolutely.
And so, yeah, we
Absolutely.
worship a good, holy, and perfect Savior who is wholly in control. And oftentimes we just need to take a deep breath,
Right.
relax our grip and desire for control, and let
Yeah.
Him lead.
Yes, exactly. So stop being afraid and start being purposefully prayerful
Mm,
about how we step into that
yeah.
mess.
Yeah. Amen.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, again, thank you for coming
You're
in, for
welcome.
hanging out, for talking. You are such a gift. For those of you watching, we have a wonderful children's ministry here. Meets Sunday mornings during both services, as well as Bright on Wednesday nights
Yes.
from
September through April.
Yeah.
May. April.
So,
May.
Again, Lauren
What month
leads
are we in?
an incredible group of men and women who do a wonderful job of sharing and instilling the gospel in the lives of our students. So, Lauren, thank you for taking some time to
Thanks
come and
for
talk.
having me today.
Yeah, first ever podcast. You
Yes.
did it. So anyway, thank you for listening, friends. That's episode 5, where we've been talking about emergent Gen Alpha and how we as the church and we as parents can minister them effectively. God bless you, and thanks for listening.